The frosty dawn settled over the quiet fields near Greystone, the air crisp with an almost unnatural stillness. Farmers paused their early morning routines as a blinding light pierced the sky, followed by the faint hum of energy vibrating through the ground. Conversations hushed as an object, sleek and otherworldly, descended from the heavens. It hovered for a moment before gently touching down, the earth beneath it hissing with heat. The object's surface shimmered like liquid silver, shifting in mesmerizing patterns. A panel slid open, revealing a tall, ethereal figure. She stepped onto the frosted grass, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Her form was slender but imposing, her skin glimmering like translucent ice under the pale sun. A flowing, crystalline garment clung to her, refracting light into rainbow hues. Her face, though humanoid, was otherworldly, sharp angles softened by an almost unnatural symmetry. Her glowing eyes swept across the field, assessing her surroundings with a calm, detached air. The villagers of Greystone were not strangers to alien visitors. Over the decades, other species had landed on Earth, seeking knowledge, trade, or refuge. Yet, this being's presence was unlike anything they had ever seen. She exuded an aura of cold authority, her mere presence silencing the murmurs of the growing crowd. Word of her arrival reached the local council swiftly. By mid-morning, Varen, the village's linguist and mediator, approached the landing site. He was a middle-aged man, his years of studying alien languages and customs etched into the lines on his face. As he neared, he raised his hands in a gesture of peace. The alien turned to him, her movements fluid yet precise, as if every gesture was calculated. "I am Lithra," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper, like the sound of wind through icy peaks. "I am a delegate of the Zendari Council. I come to observe your kind." Varen bowed slightly. "Welcome to Earth, Lithra. I am Varen, a representative of this village. We are honored by your visit." Her glowing eyes studied him, unblinking. "You speak our language adequately. That will suffice." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the villagers who had gathered at a cautious distance. "I require accommodations to continue my observations." Varen nodded. "We have a communal house prepared for visitors like yourself. Please follow me." Lithra moved with an almost ghostly grace as she followed him into the village. The crowd parted, their curiosity tempered by caution. Children clung to their parents, whispering questions about the shimmering stranger. Lithra paid them no mind, her focus unwavering. The house Varen led her to was modest but welcoming. A small hearth crackled in the corner, and the furniture, though simple, was arranged with care. Lithra stepped inside, her presence making the space feel colder despite the fire. She regarded her surroundings with detached interest before turning to Varen. "This will suffice," she said. "I will observe your people and learn of your ways. My purpose is to understand." Varen nodded again, careful to maintain a respectful tone. "If there is anything you need, let us know. We will do our best to accommodate you." Lithra inclined her head slightly, an acknowledgement that seemed more out of politeness than gratitude. With that, Varen excused himself, leaving her alone in the quiet room. As the hours passed, Lithra sat by the window, her glowing eyes fixed on the bustling village outside. She observed the humans going about their daily lives, their movements and expressions filled with an energy and warmth that seemed foreign to her. She watched as a group of children chased each other through the streets, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. She noted the way couples walked hand in hand, their gestures small but meaningful. When night fell, she ventured outside, her crystalline figure gleaming under the moonlight. She wandered through the village, her presence drawing curious stares. The humans' warmth, their openness, and their unspoken connections intrigued her in ways she could not yet articulate. Her kind did not share such bonds. The Zendari prided themselves on logic and efficiency, their interactions devoid of the emotional entanglements she saw here. The following morning, as she continued her silent observations, A group of women invited her to join them by the river. Lithra hesitated but accepted, intrigued by their easy camaraderie. The women were washing clothes, their hands moving rhythmically through the water as they chatted and laughed. Lithra watched them intently, her glowing eyes narrowing as she listened to their conversation. One of the women, a lively brunette named Mirren, spoke of her children, her tone filled with pride and affection. Another shared a story about her husband, her cheeks flushing as she described their courtship. Lithra tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "You create life within your bodies?" she asked, her voice cutting through their laughter. The women exchanged surprised glances before nodding. "Yes," Mirren replied, her smile softening. "When two people love each other, they can create life together." Lithra's expression remained impassive, but her glowing eyes betrayed her fascination. "Explain?" The women hesitated, unsure how to simplify such a profound aspect of their existence. Finally, one of them spoke, her voice gentle. "It starts with a connection, a bond between two people. From that connection comes an act of love, and if nature allows, life begins to grow within the woman." Lithra was silent for a moment, processing the information. Her kind reproduced through artificial means, their union sterile and emotionless. The concept of life born from connection and love was entirely foreign to her. As she returned to the communal house that evening, Lithra found herself replaying the women's words in her mind. She sat by the hearth, her usually serene expression troubled. For the first time, she felt a crack in the icy detachment that had always defined her. Her curiosity deepened the next day when she accompanied Varen to a village festival. The humans danced and sang, their joy palpable. Lithra stood at the edge of the crowd, her crystalline form glowing softly under the lanterns. She watched as couples twirled together, their laughter ringing out like music. One couple caught her attention as they slipped away from the crowd, their hands intertwined. Intrigued, Lithra followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen. She found them beneath a tree, their bodies entwined in an embrace that was both tender and passionate. The sight stirred something within her, a warmth that felt foreign and unsettling. She returned to the festival, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and emotions. That night, as she sat by the hearth, she turned to Varen, who had joined her to share a meal. "Humans share their bodies as an expression of connection?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Varen paused, his fork hovering above his plate. "Yes, it's a way to show love, trust, and intimacy. It's not just about reproduction. It's about bonding." Lithra's gaze softened, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. "We Zendari do not share such bonds. Our unions are functional, devoid of sentiment." Varen nodded slowly. "Perhaps that's something you can learn from us." For the first time, Lithra felt a warmth spreading through her, melting the icy walls she had built around herself. The human's way of life was strange, but it was also beautiful. In the days that followed, Lithra found herself drawn deeper into the rhythms of human life. She spent more time among the villagers, observing them not just from a distance but in closer, more personal ways. They were surprisingly accepting of her presence, their initial wariness giving way to curiosity and even warmth. Children would run up to her, their laughter bright and unrestrained, asking her about her glowing eyes or trying to mimic the graceful way she moved. Though she rarely answered their questions, she found their unguarded energy oddly comforting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, Lithra found herself sitting by the river. The water shimmered like liquid fire, reflecting the fading light. A young woman named Aelin approached her, carrying a woven basket filled with freshly picked flowers. Aelin was one of the few villagers who seemed completely at ease around Lithra, often striking up conversations without hesitation. "Do your people have sunsets like this on your world?" Aelin asked, settling beside Lithra on the soft grass. Lithra tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. "No, our world is bathed in perpetual light. It is cold, unchanging." Aelin smiled, her gaze drifting to the sky. "It's beautiful, isn't it? The way the colors shift and dance. It feels alive." Lithra said nothing, but her fingers brushed the grass, the sensation strangely grounding. She had never thought of a sky as alive before, yet Aelin's words lingered in her mind. As they sat in silence, Aelin began weaving the flowers from her basket into a delicate crown. Lithra watched her, intrigued by the careful movements of her hands. When Aelin finished, she held the crown out to Lithra with a shy smile. "For you," she said. Lithra hesitated, the gesture unfamiliar and unexpected. But she took the crown, her crystalline fingers brushing against Aelin's warm hand. The contact sent a strange warmth coursing through her, a sensation that was both unsettling and oddly pleasant. "Thank you," Lithra said softly, placing the crown atop her head. Aelin beamed, her smile radiant. That night, as Lithra returned to the communal house, she found Varen waiting for her by the hearth. He looked up as she entered, his expression thoughtful. "You've been spending more time with the villagers," he observed. Lithra nodded, sitting across from him. "Your people are fascinating. Their ways are unlike anything I have known." Varen leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And what do you think of them?" Lithra was silent for a moment, her glowing eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "They are warm," she said finally, "not just in body, but in spirit. They live with a vibrancy that my kind does not understand." Varen smiled. "That's one way to put it. Humans are messy, emotional creatures, but that's part of what makes us who we are." Lithra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Your emotions give you strength, but they also make you vulnerable. I do not understand how you can live with such contradictions." Varen chuckled. "That's the beauty of it, Lithra. Life isn't meant to be perfectly logical. It's meant to be felt." The words lingered in Lithra's mind long after Varen retired for the night. She sat by the window, her gaze drifting to the stars. Her kind had always prided themselves on their logic, their detachment. But here, among these strange, warm beings, she was beginning to see the cracks in her own beliefs. The next day, a commotion in the village drew her attention. A group of men and women had gathered near the fields, their voices raised in excitement. Curious, Lithra approached, her presence immediately silencing the crowd. They stepped aside to reveal a group of travelers, merchants from a neighboring village. Among them was a man who stood out even among the lively group. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his sun-kissed skin and dark eyes exuding a quiet strength. His clothes were simple, but his confident demeanor set him apart. When his gaze met Lithra's, he paused, his expression one of open curiosity. "You must be the alien everyone's talking about," he said, his voice deep and warm. Lithra inclined her head. "I am Lithra of the Zendari Council." "I'm Arian," he said, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Lithra looked at his hand, the gesture unfamiliar. After a moment, she reached out, her crystalline fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a spark of warmth through her, and she quickly withdrew her hand, her expression unreadable. Arian smiled, unperturbed. "I've traveled to many villages, but I've never met anyone like you." Lithra studied him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Few have." The villagers watched their exchange with interest, whispers passing among them. Arian seemed unfazed by the attention, his focus entirely on Lithra. As the day wore on, Arian and his fellow merchants set up their wares in the village square. Lithra found herself drawn to his stall, where he sold intricately crafted jewelry. The pieces sparkled in the sunlight, their designs intricate and delicate. "This one suits you," Arian said, holding up a necklace adorned with a crystal pendant. "It matches your eyes." Lithra regarded the necklace, her expression neutral. "I do not require adornments." "Maybe not," Arian said, his tone playful. But sometimes it's nice to have something that makes you feel special. Lithra considered his words, a faint warmth spreading through her. She took the necklace, her fingers brushing against his once more. This time, she did not pull away as quickly. That evening, as the village celebrated the merchant's arrival, Lithra found herself seated beside Arian by the fire. The villagers danced and sang around them, their joy infectious. Arian turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "What do you think of humans?" he asked. Lithra hesitated, her gaze fixed on the flames. "You are different from my kind. You live with an intensity that I do not understand." Arian smiled. "Maybe we can teach you." Lithra met his gaze, a flicker of something unfamiliar passing through her. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to these humans than she had initially thought. And as the fire crackled and the villagers' laughter filled the air, she felt the icy walls within her begin to melt just a little more. In the days following the merchant's visit, Lithra found herself reflecting on her interactions with Arian. His warm demeanor and candid curiosity about her world were unlike the cautious distance most humans maintained. Something about his straightforward nature left an impression, though she couldn't quite explain why. As she walked through the village one morning, the crisp air carrying the scent of wildflowers, she caught sight of Arian near the fields, speaking with a group of villagers. His laughter rang out, rich and genuine, as he gestured animatedly during their conversation. He noticed her approach and waved her over. "Lithra, come join us." Lithra hesitated, unsure of how to respond to his unguarded enthusiasm. Yet, there was something magnetic about it, pulling her closer despite her reservations. "We were just talking about how different life is in the other villages," Arian explained as she approached. "They're curious to hear more about your world." Lithra's crystalline skin shimmered faintly in the sunlight as she regarded the villagers. Their faces were open and expectant, yet she sensed no malice in their curiosity. "My world is cold," she began, her voice measured. "It is ruled by logic and order. Emotions are seen as distractions, unnecessary for survival." One of the older villagers, a man with lines of wisdom etched into his face, frowned. "That sounds lonely." Lithra tilted her head. "Loneliness is not something we acknowledge. We exist to serve the collective good, not individual desires." Arian leaned against a wooden fence, his dark eyes thoughtful. "And yet you're here, far from your people. Doesn't that make you different?" The question caught Lithra off guard. She had spent little time contemplating her own divergence from Zendari norms. Her exile had been a necessity, not a choice. Or so she had believed. "I do not know," she admitted, the words feeling strange on her tongue. Arian smiled softly. "Maybe being here is exactly what you need to find out." Later that day, Lithra found herself by the river again. The crown of woven flowers Aelin had given her still in her possession. She turned it over in her hands, studying the intricate weave of stems and petals. Despite its fragility, it had endured. Arian approached, his footsteps soft on the grass. "You always seem to find the quiet spots," he remarked, sitting down beside her. "They are calming," Lithra replied, her gaze fixed on the flowing water. Arian chuckled. "I get that. Sometimes it's nice to step away from all the noise and just breathe." Lithra looked at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Your people place much value on such things, breathing, feeling, being. It is alien to me." Arian leaned back on his hands, his expression relaxed. "And yet, here you are, doing exactly that." The statement hung in the air between them, a quiet truth Lithra could not deny. "What about your people?" Arian asked after a moment. "Do they not care for one another in their own way?" "We care for the collective," Lithra said. "Individual bonds are considered weaknesses. We do not form attachments." Arian raised an eyebrow. "That sounds bleak. How do you even survive without connection?" Lithra hesitated. "We survive because it is our purpose. Attachment serves no function in our society. Arian shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Maybe, but I think you're learning it serves a function here. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter drifting from the village square. Lithra glanced toward the noise, her expression unreadable. "Come on," Arian said, standing and offering her a hand. "You should join the others. There's a celebration tonight, food, music, dancing. You might actually enjoy it." Lithra regarded his outstretched hand, the warmth of his presence palpable even without touching. After a moment, she placed her crystalline fingers in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. The celebration was a riot of color and sound, the air alive with the hum of conversation and the rhythm of drums. Lithra stood at the edge of the square, her senses overwhelmed by the sheer vitality of the scene. Arian appeared beside her, a cup of something fragrant in his hand. "Try this," he said, offering it to her. She took the cup, the liquid within a deep amber hue. Hesitant, she brought it to her lips and sipped. The flavor was bold and rich, warming her from the inside out. "It's mead," Arian explained, "made from honey. Sweet, isn't it?" Lithra nodded, the unfamiliar sensation lingering on her tongue. As the evening wore on, Arian coaxed her into the center of the square, where villagers danced in a circle. The movements were chaotic, uncoordinated, and yet full of life. "Just follow my lead," Arian said, taking her hands. Lithra tried to mimic his movements, her steps awkward and hesitant. But as the music swelled and the villagers cheered, she found herself loosening, her body moving more freely. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something new, a lightness, a joy that defied her understanding. When the music finally slowed and the dancers dispersed, Arian led her to the edge of the square. They sat together under the stars, the village aglow with the soft light of lanterns. "You're changing," Arian said quietly. Lithra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps, but I do not yet know what I am becoming." Arian smiled. "Whatever it is, I think it'll be something amazing." As the night deepened, Lithra felt a strange warmth settle over her, not just from the mead or the firelight, but from the connection she was beginning to forge. For the first time, she wondered if her exile had been a blessing in disguise, a chance to discover a part of herself she had never known existed. As the weeks passed, Lithra continued to integrate into the village, her once rigid demeanor softening into something more fluid, more human. She still bore the crystalline sheen of her alien origins, but her heart began to resonate with emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. Arian was often at her side, his presence a steadying force in the whirlwind of her transformation. One evening, as the village prepared for the harvest festival, Lithra stood by the river, gazing at her reflection. Her once icy exterior seemed less sharp now, her features almost warm in the glow of the setting sun. The humans had changed her, just as she had changed them. Arian approached quietly, carrying a bundle of flowers. "You seem deep in thought," he said, offering her the blooms. Lithra took them, her crystalline fingers brushing his. "I have been reflecting on my purpose here. Among my people, purpose is everything. But here, it feels different." Arian smiled. "Purpose doesn't have to be about duty or survival. It can be about connection, about living." She turned to him, her glowing eyes searching his. "You have shown me that, but I still wonder if I can truly belong." "You already do," he said firmly. "You've changed this village as much as it's changed you. People look up to you, Lithra. They care about you." For a moment, the weight of his words settled over her. She had been so consumed by her own transformation that she hadn't noticed how the villagers treated her differently now, with warmth and acceptance. As the festival began, Lithra joined the celebration. She danced among the villagers, her movements no longer stiff and awkward but fluid and joyful. The laughter and music enveloped her, and for the first time, she felt truly free. Later that night, as the festivities wound down and the villagers retreated to their homes, Lithra found herself alone with Arian by the fire. The crackling flames cast shadows across their faces, and the air between them was thick with unspoken words. "You've become part of us," Arian said softly. "But I need to ask, will you stay?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lithra had always known that her exile might end one day, that her people might call her back. But the thought of leaving this place, these people, Arian, filled her with a sorrow she could not ignore. "I do not know if my people would allow it," she admitted, "but my heart tells me this is where I belong." Arian reached out, his hand resting over hers. "Then fight for it. Stay because you want to, not because you're allowed to." Tears shimmered in her glowing eyes, the first she had ever shed. "I will stay," she whispered. "For you, for them, for myself." In that moment, Lithra felt something inside her shift, a final barrier breaking down. She leaned into Arian, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. As the stars above bore silent witness, Lithra knew she had found her place, not because it was logical or expected, but because it was right. The following morning, as the sun rose over the village, Lithra stood with Arian on the hill overlooking the fields. She felt the warmth of his hand in hers, the hum of life all around her. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she faced a future not with fear, but with hope. She had melted the ice within her and discovered the fire of human connection, and it had changed her forever. And as the villagers called out to them, Arian squeezed her hand. "Welcome home," he said. Lithra smiled, the light of the rising sun reflecting in her crystalline eyes. "Yes," she replied, "home